man runs through darkness, no escort, no imperial guards, no cheering crowds, just the sound of his own breathing and the distant echo of horses somewhere behind him. His sandals are gone. The stones cut his feet. His cloak is pulled tight around his face like a criminal hiding from the law. Hours ago, he commanded the largest empire on earth. Now he is hiding in the countryside, outside Rome, listening for footsteps. Inside his cloak, his hand grips a dagger. Not to defend himself, to end everything before someone else does. He presses the blade to his throat, and still, he cannot do it. The man who ordered executions without hesitation suddenly trembles at the thought of his own death. So he waits in the dark, and the empire he ruled begins to move on without him. This is not just the story of a tyrant, it is the story of how absolute power erodes reality itself. How an empire can tolerate cruelty, corruption, even madness, for years without breaking, until one day it does. History remembers the man at the center of this collapse by a single name, Nero. For centuries, his name has been synonymous with fire, excess, and cruelty. But the real danger of his reign was not theatrical violence or extravagant palaces. It was something quieter, something far more destructive. A ruler who believed that applause mattered more than responsibility, and an empire that kept functioning long after it should have resisted him. To understand how that happened, we have to begin before the fires, before the executions, before the terror. We have to begin with a carefully constructed illusion. In the year 54 CE, the Roman Empire appeared stable. Nearly a century had passed since the rise of Augustus, the first emperor who transformed a collapsing republic into a centralized imperial state. Since then, power had remained within a single ruling family, a dynasty that controlled Rome through bloodlines, marriages, and carefully managed loyalty. But behind the marble temples and disciplined legions, the imperial system rested on a fragile truth. Rome did not actually know how to choose its rulers. There was no constitution, no formal process of succession. Power passed through influence, alliances, and sometimes assassination. When Emperor Claudius died suddenly in 54 CE, the transition happened with remarkable speed. Before the public even understood what had occurred, soldiers from the Praetorian Guard, the elite military unit stationed inside Rome, escorted a teenage boy to their barracks. There they proclaimed him emperor. He was 16 years old. His birth name was Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus. History would remember him as Nero. His rise was not the result of military success, political achievement, or popular demand. It was the work of one woman, his mother. Agrippina the Younger had spent years navigating the brutal politics of the imperial court. She had married Emperor Claudius, persuaded him to adopt her son, and slowly positioned Nero ahead of the emperor's own biological heir. When Claudius died, rumours spread quickly. Some whispered that poison had been served at dinner. No court investigation ever confirmed the accusation, but the result was undeniable. Within hours, a teenager became the ruler of the Roman world. At first, the empire did not collapse. In fact, Nero's early reign seemed promising. Two powerful men quietly managed the government behind him. One was Seneca the Younger, a Stoic philosopher who served as Nero's tutor. The other was Sextus Afranius Burrus, commander of the Praetorian Guard. Together they shaped policy, moderated decisions, and ensured that the machinery of government continued operating. Taxes were reviewed, provincial corruption was investigated, infrastructure projects continued across the empire. For 5 years, Rome functioned normally. But while senators debated policy and administrators managed the provinces, the young emperor had other interests. Nero was fascinated by performance, music, poetry, theatre. He spent long hours practicing the lyre. He rehearsed dramatic recitations. He invited small audiences to watch him sing and perform. For a Roman aristocrat, artistic hobbies were acceptable, For an emperor, they were dangerous, because ruling Rome required constant attention to power. Legions needed pay, governors required supervision. The Senate demanded careful management, but Nero did not see himself primarily as a ruler. He saw himself as an artist, and the difference would reshape the empire. Tension inside the palace began with his mother. Agrippina had engineered Nero's rise, expecting to guide his decisions, but as he grew more confident, her influence became an obstacle. The conflict between them escalated quietly. Then suddenly, another possible heir still existed, a boy named Britannicus. He was the biological son of Emperor Claudius, younger than Nero, but with a legitimate claim to the throne. One evening during a formal dinner, Britannicus drank from a cup. Moments later, he collapsed. Witnesses reported violent convulsions. Within minutes, he was dead. Nero told the room the boy had suffered a sudden seizure. No investigation followed. The body was cremated that same night. And the message was unmistakable. Even members of the imperial family could disappear without consequence. Agrippina understood the warning. For a time she withdrew, but knowledge itself made her dangerous. She knew too much about how Nero had gained power, so the emperor decided to remove her permanently. Years later, she received an invitation to attend a festival near the Bay of Naples. The celebration appeared affectionate. Nero greeted her warmly. He embraced her in public. Then he offered a special ship to carry her home. The vessel had been secretly modified, its structure designed to collapse once it reached open water. In the darkness of the bay, the mechanism triggered. Wood splintered. The deck collapsed. Passengers were thrown into the sea, but Agrippina survived. She swam through the darkness and reached the shore. When word reached Nero that his mother was still alive, panic spread through the palace. The plan had failed, so he sent soldiers. They found her in her villa. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, she understood immediately. Facing the swords, she pointed to her stomach and reportedly said, "Strike here. This is where he came from." The soldiers obeyed. Nero informed the Senate that she'd been plotting against him and had taken her own life when discovered. Few believed the story, but no one challenged it. And that silence changed everything. Because once an emperor learns there are no consequences, the boundaries disappear. Over the following years, the restraints around Nero vanished one by one. His wife, Claudia Octavia, was accused of adultery and exiled. Soon after, she was executed. Her death removed another connection to the previous emperor. Burrus, the Praetorian commander who had stabilized the early government, died under uncertain circumstances. Some suspected poison. Seneca eventually withdrew from public life, his influence fading. By the early 60s CE, the young emperor who once relied on advisors ruled almost entirely without opposition, and his ambitions expanded. In the summer of 64 CE, disaster struck Rome. Fire broke out near the Circus Maximus. In a city built largely from wood, flames spread quickly through narrow streets and crowded neighborhoods. For 6 days the fire raged. Entire districts disappeared in smoke. Families fled with whatever possessions they could carry. When the flames finally died, most of the city lay in ruins. Ancient historians debated what caused the catastrophe. Some believed it was an accident. Others suspected imperial involvement. What matters most is what followed. Nero initiated relief efforts. He opened imperial gardens to refugees. He organized emergency grain supplies. But suspicion continued spreading through the population, so he looked for someone else to blame. The target was a small religious group few Romans understood. Christians. They were outsiders in Roman society. Their refusal to honor traditional gods made them easy suspects. Arrests began. Interrogations followed. Executions soon turned into public spectacle. According to Tacitus, some victims were wrapped in animal skins and torn apart by dogs. Others were crucified. Some were covered in pitch and burned as living torches during nighttime celebrations. The punishment redirected public anger away from the emperor, but it also revealed something deeper about his rule. Fear had become a governing strategy, and the empire continued moving forward, even as its moral foundations weakened. After the fire cleared large sections of land in central Rome, Nero began construction on an enormous palace complex. The project became known as the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. It stretched across hills and valleys where entire neighborhoods had once stood. Artificial lakes reflected marble colonnades. Walls glittered with gold and precious stones. Inside were hundreds of rooms designed not for sleeping, but for display and entertainment. One dining chamber reportedly rotated slowly throughout the evening, imitating the movement of the heavens. When construction reached completion, Nero reportedly said he could finally live like a human being. For many Romans, the statement sounded like an insult. Thousands of citizens were still rebuilding homes, yet the emperor had transformed the heart of the city into a private estate. The treasury began to strain under the cost, so Nero turned to increasingly desperate solutions. Property belonging to wealthy senators was confiscated after accusations of conspiracy. Executions became tools of financial policy. Even Seneca, the philosopher who once guided the young emperor, received orders to end his own life. He obeyed, opening his veins in a final act of loyalty to a regime that had abandoned him. Meanwhile, another change was quietly unfolding. Roman currency, the silver denarius, had maintained consistent purity for generations. Under Nero, its silver content was reduced. The difference was small enough that most people did not immediately notice. But over time, the effect spread. Coins contained less precious metal. Prices slowly rose. Trust in the imperial economy began eroding. None of these developments produced an immediate rebellion. Empires rarely collapse overnight. They decay slowly. By the late 60s CE, Nero spent long periods outside Rome performing in musical competitions across Greece. He competed as a singer, poet, and charioteer, and he won every contest. Not because judges admired his talent, but because no one dared declare the emperor anything but victorious. While he travelled for applause, pressure inside the empire grew. Provincial governors faced increasing taxation demands. Military commanders watched political instability with concern. Eventually, one governor decided to act. In 68 CE, rebellion erupted in the western provinces. Support quickly shifted toward a new candidate for emperor, an elderly Roman noble named Servius Sulpicius Galba. As the revolt spread, loyalty inside Rome collapsed. The Praetorian Guard, once Nero's protectors, accepted promises of reward from Galba's supporters. One night, Nero woke to discover something unimaginable. The soldiers guarding his palace had disappeared. Messengers returned with worse news. The Senate had declared him a public enemy of the state. The Emperor of Rome had become a fugitive. And that is how the man who once ruled the Mediterranean world ended up hiding in darkness outside the city, waiting, listening, holding a dagger he could not bring himself to use. Eventually, the sound of approaching riders broke the silence. His companions urged him to act before capture. Finally, trembling, he pressed the blade to his throat. When the soldiers arrived, the last ruler of the Julio-Claudian dynasty was already dying. He was 30 years old. With his death, the bloodline that had ruled Rome since Augustus ended. The golden house he built was later dismantled. Public buildings rose in its place, including the massive amphitheatre history now calls the Colosseum. But some consequences proved harder to erase. Nero's manipulation of currency established a pattern later emperors would repeat. The slow weakening of Rome's monetary system continued for centuries, and the precedent he set that an emperor could act without restraint as long as institutions remained silent echoed through Roman history. Empires rarely collapse from a single catastrophe. They collapse when fear replaces accountability, when spectacle replaces leadership, when power survives longer than the systems meant to control it. Nero's reign did not destroy Rome overnight, but it revealed how easily an empire could be hollowed from within. If this story unsettled you, it should. History is full of rulers whose greatest damage wasn't immediate destruction. It was the dangerous example they left behind. If you enjoy deeply researched historical documentaries that explore the darker corners of the past, consider subscribing to the channel. And in the comments, tell us what disturbed you most about this story, or which historical figure we should investigate next. Because sometimes the most important lessons in history come from the moments when power went unchecked and the world kept watching in silence.